Welcome, closers. We are live once again. I'm in Austin. Jeremy Pound's coming to you from Boca Raton. We're here tag teaming the topic of sales. Jeremy, thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here, Jordan.
Where's everybody tuning in from? Those of you watching right now live, we got Pauline from Denver. Hey, Pauline, how's it going? Say hi to Brandon.
Minnesota. Did you see that?
Minnesota. Oh, yeah, that sounds pleasant. St. Petersburg. Hamden. Awesome. All right. So, guys, we're excited to talk to you today about what it looks like to onboard and train that next sales hire, to have a program in place to ensure success. When you invest the time and effort to qualify, to put out the listings, to put out the offer on the table, and to actually get somebody working in your office, you want to make sure that that person has the best possible chance of success. And if you're in that role watching right now, this is the kind of infrastructure that you can ask your leader and your manager for, and you can build yourself if it's not there. Jeremy, I want to kick off things, but before we do that, just some housekeeping. Let's first mention that there's going to be a mixer at Broker Owner on Monday night, first night of the event. We're throwing a little shindig to announce the new joint venture that we have going on together that we're excited about. We're also celebrating the release of the NARPM accounting standards. So that's taking place at the Mirage Monday night. If you want details, there's a link on the call to action at the bottom of your screen that you can click on for some more details.
Looks like your sound may not be going through for some people, Jordan. I can hear you loud and clear. Is anybody else not here, Jordan?
Yeah, is there anybody else that cannot?
Is that just a Cody issue?
Can everybody hear?
I don't hear from anyone else.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah. Can you guys hear Jordan? If you guys cannot hear Jordan, message in. All right. Looks like everybody else. Anybody can hear Jordan? All right. Eric hear us both. Okay. Excellent. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No worries. So let's just jump right into it. Jeremy, you're working with a lot of property management clients. We've probably had 20 mutual engagements now. What percentage of the people that you have worked with that have a BDM would you say are happy with their BDM and that it's going well?
I'll ask you guys on the call. I'm not going to ask you to chat in because I realize you may have your BDM on the call with you. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but I just want to show, ask yourself, you've got a BDM, or more BDMs. Are you confident that they're performing at the level they should be? And I ask you that because that's the number one question I get when I get on a call with a property owner. So Jordan says, you should really talk to Jeremy. Somebody gives me a call. The first thing they're telling me is either they know that they're completely frustrated and they have the wrong BDM and they're not sure what to do about it, or two, they're not sure, if this person's performing, or number three, they're scared to death to hire somebody because all they've heard is horror stories. And so I would venture to say anecdotally that less than 15% of the property managers that I've met, not just worked with, but met, going on the 30 to 40 range that we've talked to, has said, yeah, I got that BDM thing figured out. So it seems to be a huge problem in the industry.
So I don't know this is anything unique to property management. Sales in general is challenging, and it only gets more challenging with smaller companies where there's less infrastructure and process around that. So it's just kind of like the fact that the average industry conversion rate is around 13%. That's really poor, but it's not shocking in many ways. So let's talk through some of the mistakes that drive that unsatisfactory outcome that acts as a huge limiter on growth, because you cannot market effectively if you cannot convert the leads. If your cost per lead is low, you're crushing it, running great campaigns, Facebook ads, you're doing content marketing, your lead flow is strong, but you cannot close those leads, then you cannot afford to invest in those mediums. People think it's crazy that companies like Renters Warehouse do radio advertising. But the reality is, when you look at the back end, the systems, the processes, and the infrastructure that they have to close those leads, you get a lot more clarity on how that actually became viable because of how aggressive they are with their sales culture. So, Jeremy, walk me through what is typically missing that is the key difference for most property management companies in the sales function.
Well, it's a great point. I want to answer that question directly, but what you just said about the radio and Renters Warehouse reminds me of what we talked about last week when we were together, and we said that most people hire a salesperson because, and that means a BDM, right? I mean, all industries. You hire a salesperson because you feel like it's a task that needs to get done, right? And so you're just like, oh, someone's got to make the sales, and so let's just get somebody in here, right? Whereas possibly, the right way to do it, like a renter's warehouse, is they're creating the demand, they have a system, and they're going out and they're finding people to generate the kind of business they want. So it's a totally different mindset. And if we're going to do that, then to answer that question, the number one mistake that I see all entrepreneurs make, I mean, I've been around entrepreneurs my entire life, not just in property management. This is not exclusive to the industry. Is just, what I call being ambiguous Andy, right? It's, I need a salesperson. They're going to make sales. Great. Let's get started, right? They have no expectations. They have no real clear definition of what this person's going to do. Now, maybe they're doing sales. So in their mind, they have this, rough idea of well, they're just going to do what I do, right? They're going to return the calls and they're going to do this and that's it. Counter to that, some of the most amazing, fastest growing companies that I've worked with, and some of those are on the Inc. 500 list, they know precisely at the success day mark, let's call it 90 days, because that's what we're focused on. How do you know that person's successful by the 90th day? What does that week look like, right? Just get crystal clear. By the time they've been here, that they're locked and loaded, that they're productive, what would a successful day and week look like? Would it be that they went on 10 on-site consultations? How do we quantify that? How do we create KPIs? Is it going to be that they've made 20 outreach phone calls? Is it that we had a successful sales management meeting and their pipeline and LeadSimple was completely up to date? Is it going to be that on Friday before they go home, they send you a quick email with all of the appointments they have for next week, right? Get this clear. You should know what a week looks like, that when that asset walks out the door, you are pleased to give them their paycheck, right? Not just, okay, well, I got to pay them, right? You were like, here, take this and please come back next week. And that's the yardstick that I want you to use when you're designing that successful week at the 90-day mark. And so it's just simple, begin with the end in mind 101.
So the inverse of that is that the team member that is in that role can roll into their weekend knowing that they had a great week. That is defined by something other than the number of contracts signed. We're not ever advocating that you get off of the money, go get that check. But you need to have more clarity than just saying it's the number of contracts that were signed. And if we didn't get in that number of contracts this week, then you failed. That's an ignorant way to manage. That is not real leadership. So it's really for both parties, that assurance and confidence that you can trust the process, because the process is really well thought through and bigger than the outcome with any specific period of time.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm curious, if you're on the call, ask yourself, have I ever even thought about what a successful week looks like for my BDM, right? And we talked, Jordan just mentioned that. Not only is that going to give you peace of mind and prevent some of that frustration and anxiety, but it's also going to make them a more satisfied team member, and it's going to keep the right people around a lot longer.
So when we talk about this 90 days wasn't an arbitrary stat. I mean, the reality is, hey, plan the next decade of this successful team member working with you. I'm excited about that. But the 90 days is around this critical window of when we expect the majority of the flux around the ramp happening, where there's an extra need for training. There's an extra need determining whether or not this is a fit in both parties. Walk me through what's happening and how you kind of orchestrate the different timeframes. Obviously, the first week looks different than the 10th week. Walk me through some of that minutia.
This is a great point. So we're contrasting what most people do, what's natural for us, versus what the top performers do. And so what you can do to be successful. This is a recipe for success. I've seen it work over and over again, and it's not that hard. It's just very intentional and it's very proactive. And so we mentioned this 90-day mark, Jordan. I think 90 days is the absolute last day that you should have somebody on your team before they're, meeting that criteria that I said before, where you are pleased as a peach that they are on your team. That's what we're looking for here. That's the bar for success. Not just somebody that's surviving, but somebody who's thriving and you can't imagine not having them. So I think that a lot of people are going to be successful much faster than that if you follow this template, okay? So we get crystal clear on what that perfect week looks like by 90 days. By 90 days, they should know the industry. They should know your practices. They should know your people. They should know your customer persona. It's a lot of things. So we're going to get really clear and we're going to outline, okay, now that I know what that perfect week looks like, what are all the things I'm going to need to teach them between now and then? All right. So we're going to talk about all those things, the policies that they have to know about your company, right? The regulations, how can they not get you in trouble? They need to know the type of customer you're going after, right? They need to know the onboarding process, tons of things. They even need to know their way around town and to all of your properties that they need to, meet, or whatever area you cover. So there's a lot of things. So just make a list. It's just going to take you 3 minutes to do that. Now, once you have that, now that we know what the success point looks like at 90 days, let's work our way backwards. Where should they be at 60 days? And where should they be at 30 days? So we're going to chunk this thing down. It's not okay, from day 0 to day 89, we're not sure if they're going to work out. And then day 90, all of a sudden we know, right? That's not the way it's going to happen, right? Day 90 is the absolute finish line. So we're going to know where should this person be by day 60? Where should this person be by day 30? And then we're going to get more detailed. For the first 30 days, we're actually going to say, okay, if they're going to get to that point, what do they need to accomplish each week, right? So by the end of the first week, they're going to know, our selling process. By the end of the second week, they're going to know our policies, right? Whatever it is, it's not that hard to do. Just chunk it down. It's not a science. Break it down to 4 or 5 weeks. So now we know what success looks like at the highest level and the medium level. And then for that first week, I'm actually going to suggest that you write down, what do you want to focus on day 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? Just the first 5 days, because how you start this is going to have a profound impact on their learning curve and how they, their expectations for the company. And so if you create this template, you not only are going to be more successful, but you're going to know who to keep around, at all different points, right? So if your goal is that they were here by 30 and they're not anywhere near that, you have to ask yourself, can they get there by day 60? Or am I just wasting my time and I'm better off starting the process over?
So I think what's important to note is that in some ways, Jeremy, you're kind of making this sound like a really low effort sort of thing. But I think the important delineation is that the bulk of the work associated with what you're talking about is happening before the hire.
Exactly.
So much of what is happening here is handing them a pre-built playbook around how this company and how this organization sells. That does not look like this is our bullet point of features. This is everybody else's bullet point of features. Find what is similar and what is different. The playbook is a much more in-depth document that really manifests what is unique and defensible, and that you personally as the owner have conviction around that you can communicate to the market, and what are the mechanics of how you do that. So everything we're talking about assumes that is already in place, correct?
It's a great point. So if you are winging it as the only salesperson of your company, you're probably a little overwhelmed with that request, right? But if you know how you do what you do, why people buy from you, this becomes much more manageable.
And this is in large part what the first engagement with your services actually looks like, is building out that playbook. So yeah, you can do that on your own. You can hire somebody else, but there needs to be some documentation that when they walk in the door, you're not figuring it out with them collaboratively. You've already taken ownership to really have some real moral conviction around how selling should be done within your organization. And yet that is very different than freeform conviction that is just purely preference. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. Let me just jump in, Jordan, and say that I like to say there's only 2 types of sales training methodologies. There is the playbook methodology, where you have a process and you basically repeat and wash the process over the new hire, as opposed to what I call the tribal method, where legends have been passed down by campfire from mouth to mouth for generations. And you're just going to listen to what I do. You're going to follow me around, and hopefully you too will be able to do what I do.
And you talk about this, the strength of the owner is oftentimes the weak of the business. There's plenty of owners that have it gutturally. They just intuit it and expect that somebody else is going to have it. And if you're mentally reducing this BDM hire to somebody else that has the juice, they got the charisma, the personality, you're probably setting yourself up for failure, because the person that really has the juice, that's really got the goods, they ain't working for you. They're getting paid $500,000 pushing pharmaceuticals and software to other enterprise companies. So you need the infrastructure to compensate. And the truth is, this doesn't have to be a high charisma first driven role. What it needs is structure. So when we talk about the setting the expectations on the front side, so there's mutual alignment, everybody knows what it looks like to have a successful week. That is something more than just we signed X number of contracts. We believe in an activity-based model. The number of contracts, the revenue is the what, the activities are the why. If you don't have the why, you cannot coach to the what. Let's go back and review the scorecard that we referenced last week. you're now going to share the example of what we built out specifically for the industry for some of our clients. Can you go ahead and pull that up just to kind of walk through?
Yeah.
Give me the preface on the function and utility of this document, which we're going to share with everybody that's listening.
Give me one sec, but as I'm doing that, I feel like my camera got a little smudge on it there. All right, hopefully that's better. I can already tell that's better. All right, so I'm going to pull up this scorecard and just kind of walk you guys through it verbally on what we think is so important. So I don't know if you guys were on the podcast last week, but we talked about how we use scorecards, both to manage our salespeople and our companies, and how we've been teaching people in the property management space to do that as well. And so essentially, I think that a successful role in your company, any company, especially BDM, is distilled down to a single page. That single page is a scorecard. These are the absolute non-negotiables. It is the blueprint for success for that person, and they can come back to it time and time again to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And so at the top of that is always the mission, right? Why does this position even exist, right? And just basically to make sales it really lacks motivation, right? There's no motivating factor. But by the way, if the mission of the BDM is to go out there and to spread the message, to help more people in the community hire your company instead of the dysfunctional team down the street, the people that are doing it part-time, it's to essentially bring in only the right clients, and basically it's to keep the company healthy and growing and thriving. I mean, obviously to me there's a lot of romance in that, but that's just how I feel about the sales position in general. I come to it by very natural, but essentially can
you kick off the screen share?
Yeah, my Google Drive is going a little slow. I'm trying to kill time there while it came up real fast.
Nice. Well, okay, back at it then. You're doing a great job.
You want to just chat in the? Do you have the link handy by any chance? That might give me. Oh, I got it right here. Here we go.
There we go, baby.
As it pulls up, I will share this with you guys.
So context. What is the circumstance in which I'm viewing this document with my team members? Weekly?
So first of all, you're not going to hire them until they've seen this. In a perfect case scenario, if you haven't made this hire yet, you're going to sit down with them once you believe they're the right person and say, this is what your day is going to look like. This is what we're going to go over every single week. I'm going to ask you to learn a lot of things and do a lot of things right, but these are the non-negotiables. And if you're not doing these right, it doesn't matter how great you're doing, you're just not going to be successful here. And so now that it's up, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
I love that. So this is in part the difference between agreements versus expectations. An expectation is what I want to have happen, spoken or unspoken. An agreement is what we have mutually looked at and agreed upon will need to happen in order for success and employment to continue.
All right. So I see our little talking heads got small, and you guys can probably see this BDM scorecard. So this is one of my favorite clients, Acme Properties, clearly fictional.
Nice.
Wanted to change the names to protect the innocent. So what's the mission of a BDM, right? The business development manager at Acme Properties is responsible for making great first impressions with potential clients. All new leads and referrals will be introduced to the BDM so that they can ensure that they are a good fit for the company and ensure they understand the unique capabilities and outcomes that Acme Properties delivers. Over time, the BDM will become a fountain of our most legendary customer success and service stories. The BDM is both a filter that saves the company from taking on misfit clients and a magnet that will attract perfect fit clients for years to come. So look at the clarity there, Jordan. Even if I didn't show them the rest of this, do you feel like that person is set up to make good decisions about their role as they go through the week?
Yeah. I mean, that high level summary is something you come back to over and over and over again. It's something you can modify over time. It's not set in stone. This isn't Moses bringing down the 10 commandments, but it is a North Star. And there has to be a North Star that allows you to summarize all the training, all the minutia below it. There has to be a North Star. I love that you start there. Yeah,
absolutely. And by the way, I feel like the top of the scorecard changes far less than the rest, right? Like that's kind of like what the essence, the genesis of why you have this role. Now we go down to outcomes, right? So how can we measure this person? And so the outcomes are what you want them to do for your company. The metric is how you measure success, right? And so you never put a quota in a scorecard because, so let's just look at this. Meets weekly activity quota. Notice I say activity quota and not sales quota, right, Jordan? It's not the sales they made. It's the activities they do on a weekly basis. And so new leads per week, the calls per week that they made, the influencer outreach calls that they made, and the average response time. This is just for Acme. Yours may be different, right? So we got to figure out what those are. And then we're going to set that quota over time. So we don't expect them to make the same amount of calls on the first week as we do on the 10th week. We may not expect them to have as many presentations in the month of December as we do in the month of August, right? So we want to be aware of what we're setting them up for, and we will change those. But the non-negotiable is that we're going to set those quotas, and then you're going to actually accomplish them. So that's the first thing I want to say. And then each week, they're going to come to the meeting with their comments, right? I'm crushing this, or I really struggled this week because I missed 2 days because I was sick. And they're doing all the work and all the prep and self-evaluating before the weekly sales meeting or the monthly review, depending on how you guys decide to do this. So does that work, Jordan? I don't know if you want me to go through everything or you just wanted to keep it high level.
Yeah, I mean, so the context in which we're using this document is to having an ongoing conversation to get crystal clear on what job performance looks like. And if there's pushback from your BDM, or if you as the team member are looking at this and it doesn't work for you, have the conversation, have the wherewithal to talk about how this document would need to change. But this is what this isn't. Here's what I'm getting at. What this is trying to avoid is this deep sense of unexpressed, unclear frustration that it's not going well. And you can't perfectly express why, but you've got an underlying sense that they're just not doing the right things. And that could also be on the person who is in this role. If you find yourself frustrated on an ongoing basis, that is a sign that things are not going well, but it's also and if you can't articulate it why, that is also a sign that you have failed to provide the level of clarity around what the job actually looks like. That's the function of this document. So if you want a copy of this document, go ahead and just type in scorecard in the comments and we'll go ahead and send this out afterwards. But just type in scorecard. We'll send this out to everybody in here that wants a copy. So Jeremy, at the end of the day, you're in a sales meeting, you go through this document, you're providing some feedback back and forth. What about the actual dollars? What about the revenue? Because you mentioned that that's not listed here, but again, God forbid we're in here saying that quota doesn't matter. Talk to me about the actual getting the check. Talk to me about that dollar.
So 100%. I mean, so first of all, I think that this scorecard, I do want to clarify, I am more of a fan of using the actual scorecard on a monthly basis. But if you look at the numbers that we're driving, that's what we'll review on a weekly basis, right? So you may not, I just want to make everybody clear because you're going to download this. We're going to send it to you. I think that a sales meeting, refer to the last conversation we had, the last crowdcast.
Yes.
Where Jordan and I talked about that, because I don't want you to spend a whole hour a week on this. I want you coaching. I want you investigating the pipeline. Right. Having said that, if you have any technology at all, if you're a LeadSimple customer, you have dashboards, numbers should be reported by the system. There should be a giant spotlight on the numbers that matter. And you should connect every time money comes in or doesn't come in. You want to connect the dots back to the activity that led it there. So your salesperson has an amazing week. Great. What did you do let's review the last week, the last month, right? How did you guys do? Do you understand how those activities actually led to the sale? Now on the flip side, when the sales aren't made, do the same thing. Let's look at your scorecard for last week and last month. Were you hitting your numbers? You were? Okay, well then we're missing something else. Let's strategize about it, right? And now there's not frustration involved. It's not you pointing the finger. It's you coming together as a team with aligned action. They're doing everything you asked them to do. So there's something else that has to be addressed. And it is now a company issue, not a salesperson issue. Does that make sense, Jordan?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is your one-on-one guide. This is not actually what you're using to actively coach. If you diagnose there's a problem, how you actually get somebody over that, the coaching, the upskilling is a separate conversation. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about what some of the other prerequisites are that are undergirding this discussion. So if we just back up to what we're already assuming is in place to allow somebody to be successful, we talked about this ahead of time a little bit. And one of the things that you really highlighted out of the gate was this. We talked a little bit about having a playbook. We also talked a little bit about the CRM piece. Where does the CRM piece come in? I mean, I've got pretty strong opinions about this, Jeremy, but for you, is this optional? Is this a nice to have? Where do you see the CRM enabling success?
I teach that we should have a show, not tell environment. Okay. I'm a big believer in that. I think that's one of the 3 keys to actually getting your team to adopt the CRM. If you allow somebody to walk into a sales meeting and tell you everything they did, 1, you're going to waste a lot of time. Two, you are subtly reinforcing that the CRM is an afterthought. When I do a sales meeting, either virtually, it's on the screen. If it's physical, I've got it on a conference room. If you won't invest in a big screen to do this, then you're crazy because it'll pay for itself in dividends. Pipeline investigation is a visual thing, right? So that's what I mean by a show, not tell environment. I don't care how I even believe that and most of you guys are probably doing this, right? But this just really punctuates it. You should not pay a commission. You should not give credit for a sale unless the necessary, sale has been made in the CRM, right? There's no secondary form to fill out. There's no commission report. You use the CRM to drive behavior. And so the more you make it a part of how you're coaching, how you're communicating, how you're measuring, the more it's going to be used. So I don't think it's not only do I not think it's optional, I think it is actually the true source, the one truth of source of business. And if you use it for that, you not only know how much you're making, how much you're closing, but you can finally reach that holy grail of forecasting and starting to know what you'll be making. I had a great call with Steve, our mutual friend of Good Life, Steve Welty in San Diego. And, I did kind of a 6-month recap after we'd worked together, what worked, what didn't. I wanted to learn. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is Steve said, I know how much money I'm going to make this whole year, right? I know how much money I'm going to make next month. I know how much money I'm going to make in 6 months. Because of the work I've done with you on the sales side, the work I've done with Profit Coach and Jordan, I literally know how much money I'm going to make. And that creates so much predictability in my life, which is something we as entrepreneurs typically take for granted and say, yeah, that's for everybody else. That's for those W-2ers. But in reality, it is actually what we want with our businesses. And so I know I got off on a little tangent there, but I'm a big believer in the system.
I love that. So, if you took that advice to its logical conclusion, that would mean that commissions happen on the basis of what is in the CRM. And this is a small, simple, free point. There's no cost to implement this, but the impact is profound. If you're cutting checks, if you are cutting commission checks based on documentation in some other system, in some other spreadsheet, as opposed to the CRM, then what you are doing is affirming that updating the CRM and keeping it up to date doesn't really matter. It's a nice to have. Wouldn't it be nice? But if you don't, whatever, we'll track it somehow else. We'll track it in the other system. The number one way to enforce CRM compliance, to get your team to use it, is to simply only pay based on the deals that are marked closed in your CRM. It's that simple. You do that, it will be updated, period. There's nobody that's going to forget, oh boy, I keep forgetting to get paid because I couldn't take the time to update the status of the lead. It won't be happening for you. So take that and think about it. So the things that we listed on what you must have before day one are your expectations defined in a scorecard with defined KPIs, a CRM in place, a high-level sales process defined, a weekly sales meeting template. We referenced that in last week's Crowdcast, which I've dropped the link to in the chat. But there is more. If we're talking about the ideal scenario, you would also have, number one, a sales playbook. This is what you build out for property management companies. Talk to me a little bit about what that playbook looks like. They do or don't work with you. They work with somebody else. They do it on their own. Can you just give some rough parameters of what the end state of that kind of a playbook actually looks like?
Yeah, great point. I mean, the playbook, is kind of the sales Bible, right? It's how you do it at Acme Properties, right? This is how we do things here. Every time somebody asks us to explain our price, we say it this way, right? Every time somebody gives us an objection to this policy, we have thought out the best answer, not just a answer, but the best answer. And that is what we will use every time until we come up with a better answer, at which point we will update the playbook. It's a living, breathing document. So, now, I don't want you guys to confuse that with it being scripts, right? So I think a script is I pick up the phone or I walk in, I start at A, and then when I get to Z, I'm done, right? That's what most salespeople do when they're handed scripts. What we want to do is we want to create tools in a toolbox. So we believe that the salesperson, it's a system as a floor, not as a ceiling, right? So it enables them to always perform at least this good. They're going to use the skills that you hired them for. They're going to listen. They're going to understand pain points, and they are going to be armed with the right tool in the toolbox for each scenario. That's what a good playbook does. So getting down to, actual mechanisms and a list item, what's in a playbook, I believe that at the very first page of your playbook should be a single page, a single graphic that explains how you turn a stranger into a customer, right? What's the best way? How do you take a total stranger, turn them to a customer. This is how we do it at Acme. And if you can't distill that down to one page, to one graphic, you don't really have a standardized sales process. So I hope that answers the question you were looking for.
You know, in summary, guys, when he says playbook, think football, think X's and O's, think how specific plays are executed, how a route is run, how a lateral is thrown. That doesn't mean there's not deviations. That doesn't mean there's not, you don't call an audible. That doesn't mean that there are not talented team members that are using the dynamicism that they've built up over time. But it does mean that there is always an excellent default. There is an excellent, well thought through default to move the sale from prospect to close with all these sub-constituent pieces. So that's the ideal scenario to make sure that you're really crushing it. The other piece is obviously lead flow. Talk a little bit about where lead flow fits in this process. I mean, is all this just a waste of time if you don't have a really robust lead flow, Jeremy?
That's a really good question. So I think, the proverbial, it depends. Are you hiring this BDM to focus on being a lead generator? And if you are, then you don't need lead flow because that's what this person's going to do. They're going to create strategic alliances, generate referrals. More often than not, what Jordan and I advocate and what most property managers are doing when they come to us is they are taking the responsibility on for generating leads, and they are hiring a BDM to effectively close them, right? So if you look at that mission that I read so passionately about the BDM at Acme Properties, that BDM was responsible for taking a lead and deciding if they should go forward and making sure that they win as many of those right fit opportunities as they can. So having said that, if that's you, which most of us probably are, then I just imagine if, I trained you how to shoot a free throw, right? We went over it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I said, okay, but now you can't go to the gym for the next 2 months, right? How do you think you'd be when you came back in 2 months, right? You wouldn't remember the fundamentals of what we did. And so I think that you need a certain amount of velocity, a certain amount of at-bats or opportunities for this person to get good. And so don't get hung up on the number because I know some people are very black and white. I like to see that a property manager has at least 10 leads per week before they hire a BDM. That's just a number that I work with because I've seen it. You imagine 10 leads per week is enough to get really good, really fast at the playbook. And so that's just, food for thought there.
Okay, great. So, but the inverse of that, Jeremy, is hiring somebody to do outbound. This is the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
The problem is this needs to be a proactive strategy. Choose one or the other or both on the basis of understanding these are really different activities. Don't hire a BDM and say, oh, well, I don't have enough leads. I guess I got to go do outbound. Again, figure it out. If you're going to do outbound, it's a whole different animal. You got to build out that playbook as well. And while there's some overlap, these are really different activities. So
different personality types, different strengths, mixing those is another big mistake that we didn't go over, Jordan, is I'm just going to find someone to do sales. And that means marketing, and they're just going to show up and make magic happen, right? It's an ambiguous expectation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just got to think about, are you asking somebody to rise to the occasion in a capacity that you've never demonstrated leadership in before? If so, that's a really risky proposition. All right. So the other thing that was on the ideal list before you hire the BDM is to actually have, well, I'd say two things. First, collateral, equip them with the tools to make the presentation. This is not an absolute requirement, but it really helps to have great collateral to support the sales function. But additionally,
let me just say real fast, Jordan, it doesn't have to be as much as you think, right? We have clients, they write the playbook, their collateral is just, an immediate glossy worksheet, right? Don't start thinking into PowerPoint presentation. I don't want people to get overwhelmed and get caught up in those details.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you make a good point there. So the other side of that, though, is the training materials. So having call recordings that demonstrate what an excellent call looks like and what a poor call looks like. The more frequently that you can go through that cadence of this is the top, this is the bottom, this is the top, this is the bottom, over time, the gap between the two should narrow. and the average or the median should shift towards excellence. That's what we're looking for. Investing in that process of actually inspecting the quality of the work is really important. And I know it could feel like another burden. It could feel like, why should I have to go in and inspect that? But if you're committed to operationalizing this function and you want to have responsible abdication, which means you're not doing it, but you're keeping the level of attention on it that should be there, this is a great activity. Let your team member know that you're engaged. So let me give you an example. I run a software company. A long, long time ago, back in the early days, I was in the weeds. I was in the details. I'm not technical. I can't code and program. Nowadays, if I'm in a meeting asking questions or giving feedback, I'm doing so to say, you matter, what you're working on matters, and I care. I'm not actually getting into all the minutia of how to build software because I'm not technical, but I am saying I am watching. I am assign value to this, and somebody's paying attention. I'm sure you've seen this in other areas of the business as well, Jeremy. Even if you trust the person to do a good job, you still want them to know that there are eyes on the quality, and the quality is not going to stop mattering, even if we haven't, had an in-depth conversation over the last couple of days.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit in the last crowd call, crowdcast, and it was that idea about which bus does the coach ride with, right? Is it the first string players or the third string players? And us in business have to remember that all of our best time and attention should go to the first string players, right? When they start performing well, that is not a mechanism to spend less time with them because you will basically be putting them to work for somebody else in a matter of time.
Yeah, I love that. So we've kind of given a broad overview of what that first 90 days looks like. I would love to just kind of one more time recap and walk through on expectations. So I don't think we can say this enough, but the first expectation is around timeline. Jeremy, how long does it take to on-ramp this person? Because there's some folks that are 12 months in and they're like, oh, I don't know. Have I given enough time? Am I the bad guy?
One of our processes here is a little sensational, and that's that we think if you've done the homework, you should be able to hire a BDM on Monday, and they should be autonomous by Friday. And I use that word autonomous very deliberately, right? That doesn't mean they're your rainmaker. That doesn't mean they're as good as you, the business owner. It means that you can now put them into a productive role, and you don't just have to sit there in an office and train them all day long. And they don't have to shadow you everywhere. You don't have to shadow them. If you do this right, if you do the things on the list that we talked about, and I know we kind of glossed over it a little bit, Jordan, about those recorded calls, but if you're recording successful calls, just visualize what the first week looks like. Here, when somebody comes on for sales, we say, this is how we sold. Watch this sales call. What did you notice? Write it down. What did we do well? What could we have done better? Did you notice when I did X, Y, and Z? And they say, oh, wow. And then you go let them listen to it again, right? And then when they've mastered that sales call, you give them a second sales call. And so it's such an asset that I just don't want us to gloss over, Jordan, because I think it's absolutely, essential. And so that's what a good week looks like here, right? We're really going to let them see what the standard is so that they can actually start to be successful right away.
So you brought it up. Let's just talk about role playing and the importance of role playing. Very few companies do this in the sales function. Is role playing can feel a little rote, a little mechanical, a little pretend. What do you think the importance of what does role playing look like between manager and salesperson? And what do you think is the relevance or importance of this as a mechanism to upskill over time?
This is a great question. So I'm going to steal a page from my mentor, Jack Daly, which you've heard me mention before. But I think it's really brilliant. He says, I stopped calling it role playing and started calling it practice because the professionals in the room thought that role playing was something that sounded childish. And I thought that was really, insightful. Role playing is practice, right? And if you're not practicing internally, where are you practicing at, Jordan?
Not at all.
On the customer.
with the clients.
With the customer. If you're not practicing internally, then you're always practicing. I promise you're practicing, right? And if you're not practicing internally, you're practicing on the customer. So you may be okay with that as the owner, but you're probably not okay with that with this new BDM that you hire. So role playing is extremely important. And if you guys are coming to Salt Lake City, we're going to talk about how to practice in an effective way. And I'm going to show you guys how much fun practice can be and how fast it can make you better at what you do. And so this is what I like to do in practice. And we're going to talk about this in depth in Salt Lake City, but I'll try to give you the quick version. Ideally, there's 3 people involved. We call it the triangle practice. Now, if you can't do that, that's okay. But get somebody involved who's not even in the sales department. That's totally okay. There's 3 people in a room, and there are 3 roles. There is the buyer, there's the seller, and there's the observer. Okay. And so before you start, you're going to say, we're going to set a timer for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. I like to keep it short because you don't want to get deep into something, right? So before you start, Jordan, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to be the seller. You're the buyer. The seller gets to pick. What's the scenario and what's the goal of the call? Okay. This is an on-site consultation, Jordan. And I'm going to basically ask for the business today after we, go over the process, right? So I've got a clear goal. I've got a clear scenario, and we go. And I ask questions and you answer and I riff. The timer goes off after 3 minutes. And then why is there an observer there? Because the observer is going to actually say what they heard, right? And that's amazing. And so what's going to happen is you as the business owner, you're going to be all 3 roles, right? You're going to let the salesperson be all 3 roles. And so you're going to go around the room. And so 3 minutes times 3 is about 10 minutes, right? It's not a big deal. And in 10 minutes, you will have rehearsed a specific situation 3 times in a micro chunk, and you will be blown away at how much you will learn.
I love this. So ideally, you have the playbook in place to give some guidance to speak into this. You have the dynamicism of personality. By having everybody do it, you get off of the status quo of having the owner dictate by preference and elevate preference above process, which is danger, guys.
Yeah.
Some of y'all are doing that. I've been in that place before. This is how I do it. This is my personality type. This is my God-given ability and temperament. Why aren't you like that?
And by the way, as the owner, Jordan, you're not going to stop the practice. You're never going to interrupt the 3 minutes and say, you just said what I told you to never say. You're not going to do that. Yeah. You're going to get all the way through the practice and you're going to reflect afterwards.
I like that. So there's that group learning part of it. And there's the ability to kind of refine over time based on what's happening in the field. We're bringing the context of what happened in the field into the actual scenario, whether it's a sit, whether it's trying to get somebody on the phone initially, whether it's somebody that you had a successful appointment with, but is now stalling or they ghosted you. There's so many different scenarios that you can actually walk through over time. Jeremy, here's where I want to close. I want to close saying the same thing that I'm probably going to want to say in the vast majority of the webinars that we do. And that is this. And Jeremy, I hope you don't get sick of me saying it because I promise I'm not going to stop. Compensation is not a form of active management. I don't care what your comp model looks like. Good, bad, indifferent. Compensation is not active management. Hear me on that, people. It could be the best comp plan in the world. That is not anywhere remotely close to you actually taking ownership and providing leadership and how to do this function, how to have moral conviction as a byproduct of forethought and intention around positioning and selling in your organization. I know you feel the same way, man. We're going to talk a little bit more. We did actually talk about compensation on the last podcast, on the last Crowdcast. Next week, we're going to be talking about hiring your first BDM. So this looks like, how do you write the right ad? How do you attract a sufficient level of candidates? How do you interview those people? What does the recruiting model look like? All of this assumes, like there's so much nuance here, Jeremy. Everything we just talked about assumed that you actually brought in and hired a competent, qualified person.
Yes.
If you brought in somebody incompetent, this is a waste of time. We don't advocate that you invest all of this effort if you haven't first invested in bringing in the right candidate. We're going to get into some of those details next week. For those of you that want to join us, I'm going to drop the link here in the chat section.
And as you do that, you can actually want to say, this is almost like criteria. This is almost like pre-work for next meeting, right? Because everything I'm going to say next week is going to be about having that 90-day goal, knowing what that scorecard looks like, and how we're going to identify who's best to do that. So if you're saying, well, I'm not going to do any of the stuff Jeremy said, but I'm just going to go to that meeting next week, then you're going to be in for a shock because it's all connected.
I like that. So we worked backwards. I think that's really helpful in kind of painting the whole picture. Guys, if you have any questions right now, drop them down below. There's a questions section at the bottom. We only have one question. Go ahead.
I want to give a challenge, total off the cuff. You know, if you're listening to this and you've got a BDM, right, and you're going to come next week and you want to know, did I hire the right BDM? You know, how do I make a decision? You know, not saying that they're failing, right, but you just kind of want to know how to assess them. Consider having them take a strength finder test between now and next week, because we're going to talk a little bit about strengths-based selling and knowing, you know, what your people are good at. And while we never customize the sales process is what works. We realize there are different personality types. We realize different people have strengths, and we want to learn what those are so that we can exploit them and take advantage of them so they can be successful and set them up for success. So if you guys want to Google Strength Finder, it's like $30, I think, maybe 20. Have your salesperson take it, and then you'll be even better armed on the next call.
Awesome. Love that. Let's hopefully we're going to see you next week. We're going to see some of you in Salt Lake City, and we're going to see some of you in at Broker Owner for that whole shindig and mixer that we got going on Monday night. I'm seeing a couple of questions here. We're going to convert these into questions. You can drop questions down below, but since you guys put them in chat, we're going to go ahead and add these down below. Jeremy, let's go ahead and kick off with the first one. First question came from Dustin Edwards. Guess I missed it, but are you sharing the Google Doc or the scorecard? Yes, we are. We're going to email that out afterwards, as long as you type scorecard in the chat window. Matthew Kameyer, I'm a single salesman. BDM dropped on my lap. Should I have this new BDM focus on lead sources I'm already not working, or hand the entire process over? Jeremy, what's your answer?
Interesting. So Matthew, are you the only salesperson, or are you just happen to be not married? I'm guessing that you're the only salesperson so far, but now a BDM is dropped on your lap. That's interesting. So here's one philosophy. There's multiple ways to do this. I don't have all the info, but here's what I'm thinking, and here's what I think you can take away from this. When I work with someone who is doing all the sales themselves and they're effective at it, right? They already are managing the entire pipeline, the entire process. And you bring on somebody who's newer and assumedly not going to be as effective as you. What is the top of the funnel activity that they can take over for you so that you can maximize the bottom of your funnel activities, right? So in most property managers, that may mean that they're doing the initial phone call, they're qualifying, and they're setting the meeting up for you, right? That's just one example. Now, if you've got old leads, you know, just a treasure trove of old leads and LeadSimple that you think can be rehandled, you can build a playbook for this BDM to basically go back to the well and try to set up fresh leads for you. So think about segmenting the process and specializing it, and say, what is it that if I could spend more of my time doing this, I would make more sales, and then use everybody else to facilitate that.
I'm digging that answer. Pauline, give me a shout in chat if you're still here. I'm thinking about Key Renter out of Denver. All right, hey Pauline. So I'm thinking about Key Renter out of Denver that made a strategic decision to do just this. Rather than saying it's got to be whole hog and that BDM has to do everything soup to nuts, there was the forethought of Brandon after a conversation around a book by Justin Rothmarsh called The Machine to segment out the function. Brandon's initial impulse was to want to keep the sit, to keep the face-to-face sales time, but to have support for everything else. Jeremy, I don't know about you, but I get in situations where I have meetings, and at the end of that meeting, I've got a long list of to-dos, and that's when things start going wrong. I'm happy to engage with one-on-one FaceTime, give advice, create mandates, but when I've got a long list of stuff to do after the meeting, and I have 10 more meetings like that throughout the day, problems arise. That is an excellent example of being able to segment out the two functions. There's the need for FaceTime, and there's all the admin. There's the initial contact, there's the setting of the appointment, the going to the appointment, the sending of the contract, the onboarding, the leasing. You can parse out these roles in a strategic way. It's one way to skin the cat. Appreciate that answer. Let's move on to answering Greg Paeli's question. I'm thinking of hiring an outbound salesperson. How different would this person be? And I'm going to assume what Greg is asking is around temperament and ability. Jeremy, what's your thoughts there?
Well, stepping back from who the person is, right? With all things, you're always going to hear me go back to this. What's the goal, right? I need to know what the finish line looks like before I develop strategy for anything. So I'm guessing, I'm going to say this out loud for the benefit of the audience and to make sure that I'm calibrating my answer. I'm guessing that the goal of an outbound salesperson is to tee up a qualified lead for you, right? You think, is that fair to go from, Jordan? I mean, that's mostly what an outbound person is going to do in this industry.
Presumably he's asking about somebody that's going to call furbos, go do realtor meetups, get those people in the funnel.
Excellent. So you're going to develop a playbook for that. So great. He said, yes, perfect. So you need a system for that, right? Don't let them wing it. Don't bring somebody on who just says that they know how to do it. You got to find out what works, right? What kind of value you're adding. That's the whole part of what we do. So if you're calling, a furbo, that's going to be different than calling an influencer, which is like an agent, which is different than calling an old lead who who they are. What is it? So I don't want to get too deep in this. What's in it for them, right? What are you saying that nobody else is saying? And how is that going to lead to the finish line? You want to develop a whole playbook around that. Once you look at the playbook, it's going to be entirely obvious to you, what kind of person you need. How aggressive is this person? A lot of people over invest in, what I call a sales cowboy. Somebody can just go out there and has a lot of, bravado and exactly. That person will never follow your system more than one time. They'll do it while you're there. And then as soon as you walk out the door, they're going to be winging it. Right. So you actually kind of want to balance the pendulum of, consistency with this just tenacity and just basically lack of concern that 9 out of 10 people are going to say no, because they bought into the idea that 1 out of 10 person is going to get so much value for finally answering the phone. Right. And so I can't answer that whole thing here. There's we do a lot of work around this, but I hope it gets you thinking differently about, getting the strategy done first, then looking at that and saying, what kind of person is going to execute this effectively?
That's a really good answer. I'm thinking about a really well-known guy in the property management space. This is somebody has an aggressively growing company. Most of you guys probably know his name. And I think back about a call that I had with his BDM. I want to say this was 3 or 4 years ago, where I'm walking his BDM through the program, how LeadSimple works. And his answer was, no, I'm going to do it my way. I don't need that. And the owner, this guy was able to produce at a level that was good enough that the owner kind of sold out. He sold himself short, and he was willing to let the BDM run roughshod over him, dismiss his process. He wasn't going to take any process, and he performed at a high enough level that the owner was willing to kind of go along with that. Don't do that. I don't care how competent your BDM is. Either you're going to run the company or the company is going to run you. It's process over a specific person. So I love that commentary that you made about the cowboy. We had another question here from, okay. There was one other thing I wanted to mention. Even within outbound, you think about calling furbos. What are we talking about? That's more like an SDR function, a sales development rep. This is the lowest paid person in a large enterprise sales organization. They're pounding the phones. It's not a career. If you're in an SDR function calling furbos, number one, you need to ask what is the velocity of how many furbos for rent by owner listings that I can actually find. For most folks, there's not enough velocity of those contacts to be able to make it a full-time role. But the other thing is that temperament is just pounding the phones. That's a much more transactional sale. That's almost like borderline VA kind of work. There are a lot of outsourcing services that do that. That is very different than the relational dynamicism associated with going into realtor offices, not once, twice, 3 times, but 10 times over the long haul to build the rapport in the relationship. So there's so much nuance based on what specific channel strategy you're assigning. And that's something you got to take leadership on. All right. So follow-up question from Niku. Where can I buy a playbook? For Niku, for you or for anybody else that is on that call that is interested in getting more details about the actual process of building a sales playbook and what Jeremy has assisted a ton of my clients with, just drop your email address in the chat window and we'll make sure that Jeremy or somebody from his team follows up with you. Last question of the day is from Dustin. Is there a workbook or is the sales playbook you're speaking of for sale. So, hey, great question. So it's really on the same topic. This is not an info product. Let's get really clear. There are info products you can download. And you know what? I think that stuff is great if you're optimizing off of nothing. If you have no structure, you're starting from square one, and there's a $100 info product you can download, that's probably better than nothing. This is not that. This is a process that results in a playbook, but it's the process of extracting the insights, the awareness, the cognition, and the conviction around how you sell and what is unique about your brand. Either you are a commodity, a glorified gopher, or you're a trusted advisor. Most small businesses need help to get clarity on what that vision for being the trusted advisor looks like and the language around articulating and putting that into the marketplace. That's the gap. But Dustin, if you want more details, just enter your email address. Guys, great being with you today. Again, we'll see some of you next week on the Crowdcast. We'll see some of you in Salt Lake City for the sales training, and we'll see some of you in Vegas Monday night. We're having a fun mixer. Click on that call to action to go ahead and register for that. There's more details in the Facebook group. It's great seeing you guys. Jeremy, it's a pleasure as always, my man.
Always, man. Thanks for showing up, guys. See you soon.
All right. Be well, guys. Be good. Talk soon.